Hello and welcome back to the channel. This is a updated video where I'm going to show how to add authentication to this to-do app that I created a video on last week. There'll be a link below to the video, but just a quick review. So what we have is a payload collection that allows you to create to-dos with the title, market completion, description. You have a media associated with it, and you just have some dates stored with it. This is a basic application, but right now the application does not support authentication. So the user that it's rendering here is the user that it has when I logged in here in the admin console. So if I log out here, let's go back home. So I'm logged out here, and then if I go back to my payload template and I refresh, you can see there's no longer a user. The to-do app works because I don't have any access control on my collections, and I'm going to add that along with authentication in this video. So first, please make sure you like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave comments below if there's additional content or something specific you'd like to see about Payload. I look for my content ideas in the Discord channel, on Reddit, and just by browsing around and seeing what people have challenges with. And if I think they're interesting enough, then I'll create a video about it. So let's start with adding authentication to our to-do application. So the first thing we're going to do is try to structure this a little bit differently. So right now, if you look at the project collection, I just have I have these groups. So all the payload stuff's inside this payload group, and all the front end stuff's inside here. And right now, all of my files are just kind of lumped on top here, which is fine, but just from an organizational perspective, it'd be nice if it was separated out between what stuff needs to be authenticated and what stuff is just public access. So for now, just to keep it simple, I'm going to create a new folder in here, and I'm going to call it protected. And then I'm going to move my to-do create inside there, my page, my main page inside of there. And so let's collapse it so it's easier to see. To-dos inside of there. And what page is this? This is my main to-do list page, so I'll drop that in there. Let me just see what's going on. So to-dos, page ID there, to-do create. So this page, sorry I missed it, this is the create to-do page, and that belongs inside this to-do create folder. All right, so that's to-do create. This is going to specific to-do. And then, what is this right here? This is kind of my default layout that kind of goes with everything here, which really isn't needed, but I'll keep it around. So we're going to move the layout and the main page, which lists all the to-dos, also inside of this protected folder. Now everything inside of there. So now what I want to do is inside of my front end, I want to create a folder called authentication, and that's where I'm going to put my login page, and if I had a create account page and stuff, I'd put it inside of there. This is just for grouping. So let's click on front end, and we're going to say authentic. Like I said, these are pages that are just for grouping right now. All right. So now that we have the project organization set up, because that's what this really is about, just organization, inside of my authentication, let's create a login page. So we'll create our folder, and then inside of that folder, we're going to create a page. And this is where all of our authentication, well, our basic login code will get added. And to save us some time from kind of styling and typing it, I've kind of got a basic page layout already put together, which we will drop in, and then I'll just kind of explain what's going on. So here we have let's see if I can get this page showing. So let's add login. All right, so we have our code dropped in here for a basic login page. Let's kind of give ourselves a little bit more room and kind of walk through what we currently have. All right, so this is basic login form where we're capturing an email and a password. We have our submit button, and then on the form action, we call handle submit. And then in handle submit, we prevent default. We take our form data, we check for our email and password off our form data, and then we will do something with it. In this example, we're going to log in. Let's just put an error here So if there's no email and password required, and then we'll just return. We click the login button. You can see down here, let me make this a little bigger. We get the credentials that I passed in. And then now we're going to pass these credentials in to authenticate. All right, so a couple of things. There is a local API that you can use to log in, and then there's also a REST-based API that you can use to log in. In this example, I'm going to use the REST-based API because I want to get my cookies set appropriately, and I believe for what I'm attempting to do that using the REST-based API is the best approach to get that done. The REST-based API is documented very well in Payload documentation, which I'll include in the link below. And here's kind of the approach that I'm going to take, and I'll explain it. So you can see here what we're doing is we're going to make an API call using our current URL, which is configured inside of our .env file. We're going to call API users.login, and then we're going to make a post, headers to application JSON. We're going to stringify the email and password that were passed in. Make sure we include the credentials, like they said, for cookie handling. I just keep it here so I know on all my API calls I want to just include credentials. Doesn't matter at this point because I'm logging in and there currently are no credentials. But this is what I want to do. And then we're going to get our response back. And then after we get our response back, we need to take that JSON object and convert it. So now it's converted and we have a result. And what I want to do actually is probably before I do this, I want to make sure that my response that I got back is okay, because it doesn't make sense to convert the result if my response isn't okay. So we'll just check for the response to be okay. If the response is not okay, then we say login failed, then we return. And then now that we know we have a good response, now let's take that response, convert it to JSON. If you don't do that check, it's quite possible that the response that you get back will not be able to be converted to JSON, and then you'll run into an error here. And so then now that we have the appropriate result, we want to do a couple of things. One, we want to force the router to refresh. Well, we're going to push to our dashboard. Actually, this is jumping ahead. We don't really have a dashboard. We just have our default page we need to go to. But the other thing that we want to make sure that we do is we want to force the router to refresh with the cookie information that it just got. Let's get rid of that. With the cookie information that it just got back from our API request up here. So here we just say router.refresh. The issue that we have now is we need to import the router. So we're going to do use Next navigation, use router, and then here at the top of my function, we're just going to load in our router. So that should clean up these errors. We have this last result here. And what we're going to do with that result, let's just log it out for now because we don't really need it for anything that we're trying to do here. So let's just say console log result. Let's put a little note around it. So this is login result. And let's take a look back at our app and make sure that our paths are right. So our front end protected, it's just going to just look for the default route, and it should drop in and find this page here as a default route, which is our list of to-dos. So let's see if the login works now. The login failed. Let's see why it failed. Undefined next public server URL. Let's check our .env file. Next public payload URL. I think that's what's incorrect. What do I have inside my logout login page? I have next public server URL. Sorry. Let's set that. Refreshing. Now let's go back to our login. And you can see I got my login result down here. And what else happened? We redirected to our page. We have the appropriate user right here. But let's also make sure the other part that I was talking about before, that our cookie got dropped. And so if I drop in here and I go to my cookies, I can see that here's my payload cookie that got dropped. So I'm in. And another way you know that you're in is like now if I go back to my admin, you can see I'm logged in on my admin also. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is we need to protect our pages, right? So you saw before how I was able to access this to-do list page even though I wasn't logged in. Well, first let's implement logout, because for the other things that we want to do in the application, I need the ability to log out of the application. So let's go to our main list page and let's just add another button next to create to do. We're just going to add another button to log out, and we're going to say logout button, and we're going to create a component. Let's give myself a little bit of room so I can show you this. So app, we're going to create a component directory out here, and then inside of that we're going to create a logout button. For now we're just going to, let's just drop in the UI, and we're going to make sure we set this to use client. And let's set our export default and get this thing imported. And let's check our UI. So now we have our logout button, but we need to actually do something when we click on that. We want to follow similar behavior here where on click we want to take a specific action. So let's say on click, I'm going to handle logout. Let's add that function up here. As usual, start to add its code. Most of this code looks right, so let's talk through it. We're going to use our same URL. We're going to call the logout, the REST API on logout. We are going to include any credentials that we have. We don't really care about this response here, but we'll just leave it here for completeness. And then we want to once again, we want to refresh all of our cookie information and everything for any middleware, which we'll add later. And so that's why we want to do a router refresh. And then we also want the router to redirect us back to our login page. So let's add our router again. So this should do what we want it to do. When I click here, click handle logout, it will call my handle logout function. It will make this API recall, and it will go. So first of all, let's go back to our page. We know we're logged in. Until we get to middleware, we can go to any pages. But right now, we know we're logged in because A, we can still see our token down here, and B, we still see the admin information up here. But if I click logout now, hopefully this works the first time. It's logged out. You can see my cookie is gone. And then also, if I go back to the root page, you see I have no user object anymore. And just to let you know how I'm getting that, it was covered in the first video, but we'll just touch on it one more time. If I go to my default page here, you can see on my home page I'm getting the headers, I'm loading my payload config, and then based on that here I'm doing this payload auth call, and this payload auth call will then give me my user object, or it will return null. It's returning null, and that's why that's empty. All right, so we showed login and logout. The next thing that we want to do is we need to actually start to protect the pages so that I should only be able to get to this authenticated page, to this to-do list page if I'm authenticated. And if we look at the structure that I've created, just from a visual perspective, that basically means I don't want the user to be able to access any pages inside of this protected group unless they are authenticated. So the one brute force way to do it is to check on every single page whether or not I have a user object. And so that's making this get payload call, calling payload auth of the headers, and then getting the user object. Now, in my research on what was the best approach, I found some Next documentation that I referenced. And so here, the Next authentication, there's a whole guide on all the different ways that you can check. But in the end, from everything that I've read and for what I'm trying to do, where is it? I'm kind of following this approach of two-tier security check for authentication and authorization. First check for active session and then verify the user. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a combination of middleware to check for an active session, and then I'm going to confirm the user also by, let me close this. In my page, doing this call to get the payload object and get the full user. So the session check is just a quick check, and then I have a more detailed check here. I'm just going to show you both ways. So first, let's add this default check here to my page. And since I'm going to be calling this a lot, I'm going to extract this out into a separate component. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this code, and we are going to go back over here and at the same level of components here. So like right here, actually, we don't want to do it in the app directory because we're going to do it to source level. We're going to create a utils folder, and we're going to create getUser. And let's just drop this code we had from before in here, and try to move this out of the way. Let's get our imports because we don't need them over here anymore. I'll just do it the easy way, just kind of copy everything and then delete what I don't need. So copy, go over to getUsers, add my import up top here. And then let's start deleting the stuff I don't need. So I don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. And let's just wrap a try catch just to be safe. We'll console log the error. We don't care about it right now. So if everything's good, we'll get our user object back. Otherwise, we'll get null back. All right, so now let's go back into our protected page. Looks like I also need my payload object. So let's change this getUser to also return payload. So we'll return two things, user and payload. Otherwise, just null. So now I'm inside of get protected. First thing I'll do at startup here is my await getUser. Let's import it. Let's see, it's complaining about this down here. So let's see if that fixes it. And let's fix this null check. All right, so here getUser if exists. But then also what we're going to do down here is if I don't have my user, then we're just going to return, we're just going to go back to our login page. So router replaced, but then now we need to get our router. So what we're going to do inside of here is get a redirect. And if I don't have my user, then redirect to login. So I think that we're good. So what we did is we added this function to get my user and my payload object, so I'll need it to load the to-dos if they're needed. If there's no user, just redirect, otherwise come on through, and then we should have our user email to render here. Otherwise, redirect to login. So I'm not logged in now. I try to go to my index page, which is inside my protected route, and it won't let me go there. Let's try to go to to-do create. And you see it will let me go there because if I go to my to-do create page, there's no check here. So let's just quickly add the same getUser check here, there. So let's comment this out because I'm not using this anywhere. And we'll just take this same code and we will go to my to-do create and we'll just drop it in here to top. And so now I'll redirect to login. And then I don't actually need my payload object here because I'm not doing any queries on this page. So to-do create will now render redirect. And then let's go to our last page. Let's just copy this again. And that is a specific to-do based on ID. Let's open that up. We can remove all of this payload stuff here. And let's add our check right here at the top. And let's go back through the whole import exercise. I'll just add all missing imports this time. So we'll do our check right here at the top before we kind of get into anything else. So if we don't have a user, it bails. You can see it's making this query using the REST API. This could also be changed. I could pass in the payload object and just make this API call using the local API also. But we're focusing right now on kind of protecting the routes. So now all the routes are protected unless you're logged in. And let's just kind of go through them all. So I cannot get to my index route, redirects to login. I cannot get to do create. It redirects. And let's see if I can get to a specific to do. Okay, and it redirects back to my login page. So now we've kind of protected all of these pages by doing a hard check back to the database. Now another approach is through middleware. And the approach that I'm going to show using middleware is very similar to the approach that was mentioned in the Next documentation. They mark here that it is optional. You note that they say, however, since middleware runs on every route, including prefetch routes, it's important to only read the session from the cookie and avoid database checks to prevent performance issues. You can read through here some of the reasons why. Let's implement a simple middleware inside of this application. All right, so once again, outside of our app directory, we will create a file called middleware.ts. Add some basic imports. Let's set up the call. All right, one of the first things that I want to do here is be more specific about the naming. So this is just called page right now. Let's clean this up a bit and just call it home. So we're going to say home. We're going to move this page inside of here. So now the route is, so before we had this default route, but now it's gone because I moved it. So what we want to do is we want to, when we start the app, if everything's good, we want to redirect to home. So we want the slash or the index route to automatically redirect to home. So that is one thing that we could add to our middleware. So let's go, where did my middleware go? All right, so here we are back in our middleware, and we can just say redirect. So we're going to check to see what the path name is, and not home, right? So we don't have, actually, yes, home. So what we're going to say is that if the path name is just slash, then just send it to home. So that's the first check. And all right, so if I go here and I just say slash, it takes me to home. Oh, home, please use only absolute URLs. The easiest way to do this is just create a URL based off of the request URL. So it's going to take the requested URL that came in, which is just a slash, and then append slash home onto it. So that will get us to the right place. So let's log in so we can see that work. So there you go. So here we add a comment to let us know what we're doing here. We're redirecting to home if you try to access root. We want to check for the session cookie, and we're going to kind of follow this similar pattern as you'll see. So we're going to check for the session cookie by looking for the payload token and cookie. If there's no token / cookie value, then we're going to redirect back to the login. And ideally, you probably should do this first. So let's move this up to the top here. Otherwise, if everything's good, then we're just going to this is just middleware, so we just keep it moving. Now, if I had roles associated with my users and a bunch of other things, what you could do is, once you validated that I actually have a valid token, you could pull other values off the cookie. So ideally, there would be some user information there, and in that user information, it would let me know if that user is an admin or not. You can make those checks here in your middleware and redirect the user to the appropriate place. So there might be a specific path you want to go if the user is an admin versus if the user is a regular user. Those are the type of checks that you can do right here inside of your middleware. And the final step here is to set the configuration. Basically, what are the routes that you run? What are the routes that you want this middleware to run on? So what we've done down here is we set this master configuration, and it says that this middleware should run on the default route, on the home route, on my to-dos create, on my to-dos path, and then here, the APIs. And since we are making some API calls here, we need to make sure we're handling that appropriately up top here, because we don't want the middleware to run when we're trying to access the API routes, because we're calling the login and the logout, and those routes don't need to go through authentication. So we do need to make a minor change to our middleware here to support that. So to let API calls get through, because we're trying to handle them here, this code will basically say, if you're making an API call, then just pass it all the way through. And then our assumption is that Payload will handle access to the API routes appropriately, so we don't need to manage that access here. So that's how our middleware gets set up. And let's kind of go to the top and go over it again. So first thing we're going to do is, if we don't have a token, we're just going to redirect you to login because nothing else matters. If you do have a token and you're trying to go to index route, we redirect you to the home route. If you do have a token and you're trying to access the API, we just let you go through. Otherwise, we just let you go through. And then, like I said, we have the matchers listed down here. And this describes which routes this middleware will run on. So it's going to run on the index route, the home route, our to-do create, anything under the to-dos, and anything under the APIs route. So let's refresh this now, see if we get rid of all of our errors. So you can see we're logged in. Let's create a to-do. So it looks like I have an error actually in my to-do, which I never accounted for before, because it looks like before I just always assumed that I actually had some media. No, actually, this is a completely different error. Well, there's two things here. A, it's trying to create a media object, and I didn't pass in any media. So that's one bug that is there. And two, it looks like I'm using two different values for my environment file. So let's copy this and go over to my environment file. Let's kind of wrap these last two bugs up. So for now, I'll just put them both in there, the next public payload URL and the next public server URL. Set them both to the same, but that's what that error was about. But let's actually go into this create to-dos, because it shouldn't even be trying to create a, where are my actions? It shouldn't even be trying to create it if I didn't select any media. Actions. Actually, this actions probably shouldn't be in here either, so let's, no, we'll leave it here now. So let's take a look at our create to-do. Yeah, it's trying to use the REST API to upload media and pass ID. Like, if there's no media, we shouldn't even be trying to do this. So we'll copy this media object that we pulled off of here. And let's just say or null. So we can copy our media. We're only going to do this if there's media. So we'll just wrap this whole thing. We will come up to the top here and we'll say let media ID equal null. And then down here, we will only assign media ID inside of this check. So if we got this far, we assign the media ID, otherwise media ID is null. So now, since we've set this appropriately, so we only set the media ID if I was actually passed the media object, otherwise media ID is null. So then now we can just update this by using a spread operator. And basically, if there's a media ID, then we're going to pass over the media value. Otherwise, we won't pass the media value over. That should solve that problem. Let's see if we can try this again to add a to-do. Test to-do, some value completed. We're going to try with no media object first. So just a sample with no media object. Let's see if this fix worked. So no media object. So it looks like I'm still getting some error that for some reason, even though I don't choose a file, something is coming across. So let's be more specific here. If media and media.size is greater than 0, then we'll process it. All right, let's try now. No file, and it worked. All right, so there's no media, and then now let's try with a file. Oh. All right, let's see if it uploads it. All right, now what it's complaining about. So it appears my matcher is causing errors with this API call, so let's simplify it by just letting Payload handle any API route directly. So we'll just move this up to the top. So anything that starts with it, we just pass it straight through. We won't even go through this token phase or any of that. We'll just let the backend handle it. We'll just let the backend handle it. If I look at my create to-do actions, actually, as I'm looking at this right now, I suspect, well, you can see I'm not passing any credentials with this API call. So I suspect that that's part of what the problem is, but I don't have any credentials to pass inside of this because it's a server action. So I have to pass a token and make it way more complicated. So let's just let this API call go through. We've adjusted our middleware to let Payload handle it and see if that solves this error that we're getting. Let's refresh this page. All right, so let's put some dummy data in here. Choose a media file. And it uploaded and it got the image. So we fixed our middleware issue. We addressed the fact here that the to-do wasn't being uploaded properly if there was no media file by checking for media object and making sure the size was appropriate. So and our pages are protected. So let's do one last thing and make sure that I can go to a specific route, which I can. So we have, this is route 2. Route to ID 2. Let's go back to my to-dos. Let's log out. Let's try to get to my to-dos 2, number 2. So I think it's to-dos 2. It doesn't let me through and it redirects me. So we've addressed the issues, not the issues, but the features that we wanted to. We wanted to show how to log in a user. We wanted to show how to protect routes. We showed 2 ways to protect routes. We showed kind of this quick hit by just checking for the session from the cookie object. And then we showed the more complete check with the use of our getUser function that returns a user if we have one, along with the payload object, which we added to our pages. And let's look at our pages. And you can see how we restructured our UI to kind of make it easier to kind of manage everything by separating our authenticated page from our protected page. And then if I look at one of our pages, you can see how we're utilizing our getUser function to check and redirect at the top. So that's what I got. I'll include a link to this full source code. I'll include a link to the Next documentation, and I'll also include a link to the REST API that I utilize for this authentication. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I will talk with you later. Thanks and bye.